access to the deck and the recording that you can go back to if you need to. So again, we're going to be talking about Jewish engagement and connection. And as mentioned, a little bit about the methodology and the data source. We're going to be using results from the 2018-19 Greater Denver Jewish Community Study, which was funded by Rose Community Foundation, J and Rose Phillips Family Foundation of Colorado, and Sturm Family Foundation. In terms of the sample sources we use a variety of sources. One was a consumer data list. This is a list that had hundreds of consumer variables, and it was modeled to predict the likelihood of a person being Jewish. And we selected those who had a 0.4 probability, or at least a 40% chance of being Jewish. And then obviously we screen them with other questions to see if they are Jewish. And then we also collected, perhaps from some of you, lists from organizations in the local community. I think we had at least 25 organizations participate. So then we deduped those lists and we selected a primary sample that could be generalized to the population, and as well as supplemental samples so we can dig deeper into various subgroups. It was conducted online and by phone with live interviewers, and we called both landlines and cell phones to get a good representation. The data were collected in 2018 and the summer of 2019, and we were very pleased to get over 2,500 Jewish households to complete the survey. So the results will be from that. And we're going to focus on Jewish engagement today. Just a note, sometimes I'll be talking about respondents or adults. Other times I'll be talking about households. Just depends on what was the most appropriate base. So we have a typology that we're using. It's based on behavior. There are other things that could be based on attitudes, et cetera, but this particular one is based on behavior, and that's everything from ritual behavior to things you do in your personal life. And if you saw the presentation by Brandeis, you'll know, you might recognize this as the 5 engagement groups, and going from, I'm going to add my laser pointer here, which will hopefully be helpful and not too annoying or distracting. So going from the least engaged, minimally involved, all the way to the most engaged, immersed. And just a second. And you can see the number of households that these groups represent in the Metro Denver area. And the largest groups, representing over half of the population, are the holiday group and the communal group. Holiday, obviously the engagement is centered around holiday observance and celebrations. And the communal takes that a little farther. They celebrate holidays as well as attend community programs, activities, events, donate or volunteer to Jewish organizations, and they have a less ritual life than the immersed group. Now, 1 in 4 people have little or no involvement, or they're just involved on a personal level in activities that can be performed on an individual basis. So now let's talk about what behaviors help define these engagement groups as well as differentiate them. Starting with holidays, you can see 7 out of 10 in the blue, that's the total respondents. 7 out of 10 respondents attended a Seder in the last year. 3 out of 4 celebrate Shabbat or holidays, and 4 in 10 light Shabbat candles. Now you can see the differences in these other colored groups by the Jewish engagement group, with obviously the immersed and communal group being higher, and the minimally involved and personal groups being lower on each of these. And because this is about holidays, the holiday group is fairly high, very high on celebrating Shabbat or holidays, and pretty high, higher than average on attending the Seder. What about attending programs or activities or events at various places? You can see 4 in 10 attended JCC in the past year, 15% of Chabad, about 6 in 10 attended a synagogue, and 3 in 10 a Jewish educational program. Again, the immersed and communal groups have significantly higher attendance at each of these, except for Jewish educational program. And then interestingly, the minimally involved group have attended a JCC. Perhaps that may just be fitness activities, but you can see the differences here by Jewish engagement group. And what about their interactions with organizations in the Jewish community? So about half have donated to a Jewish organization, 2/3 have volunteered for a Jewish organization, and about a quarter have participated in a Jewish social action group. Not much differentiation by engagement group for volunteering, but donating, you can see immersed and communal, donate at higher rates, and personal. That again, that also helps define the personal group, is just below average there. And in terms of synagogues, paying dues to a congregation currently, only about 16% overall do so. About 2/3 of the immersed group do, and obviously much lower for the less engaged groups. And 10% attend services at least monthly, with about half of the immersed group doing so. Now, what about personal activities? Visiting websites with Jewish content and reading about Jewish topics in the media. You can see obviously higher engagement with the immersed group, but also the personal group is high on these two measures. Now, what about demographics? Who are these folks? Let's take a look at them. We'll start with age. So this is the age distribution for each Jewish engagement group. You can see for the least engaged group and the most engaged group, age 50 to 64 has a higher percentage. Whereas for the other three groups, younger people are overrepresented in the 18 to 34 age group. By gender, you might see some differences here, but these are not statistically significant differences. So it is about 50-50 split. We also look at marital status, and that's not just married or not married, but we also look at in married and intermarried. So you can see with the higher engagement groups, communal and immersed, higher percentages of in married, meaning both people in the relationship are Jewish, and higher percentages of intermarried or interfaith couples in the lower engaged groups. And the more engaged groups also have higher percentages of children in the household. And similarly, or conversely, I should say, the less engaged groups have higher percentages of no children in the household. And again, I know I'm going quickly through this and it's a lot of data, but you will have access to all of this. But I want to give you a flavor for what's in here and give you some of the highlights. So some interesting differences by region. In the holiday group, North and West Metro Denver area has a higher percentage, whereas in the communal group, North and East Metro area has a higher percentage. Again, it's not high, it's only 8%, but it's just relative to the other groups, it's statistically significantly higher. And perhaps not surprisingly, the immersed group has a higher percentage in the Denver area at 44%. And this is just a slightly different take on region. It looks at each region and the Jewish engagement composition within them. So within Denver, there's a higher percentage of the immersed group. And within Aurora, there's a higher percentage of minimally involved folks. And in North and West Metro, a higher percentage of the holiday group. With respect to how long they've lived in the area, no real significant differences here. So I'm just going to move on to religion and what type of Jewish person are in each of these groups. So again, for the less engaged group, these groups, you can see that there's a higher percentage of Jewish not by religion. And what do I mean by that? That means they consider themselves Jewish, but when asked about their religion, they do not say Jewish. They might have said agnostic or atheist or no religion or nothing in particular. So that is in contrast to the more engaged groups that have higher percentages of Jewish by religion folks. And similarly, with respect to denomination, the Less engaged groups have higher percentages of no denomination. That's what people said, they had no denomination. And for the more engaged groups, communal and immersed, they have higher percentages of, particularly in immersed, higher percentages of any of the denominations, whereas the communal group has a higher percentage of folks who said that they are Reform. So what about the Jewish life of people who are not synagogue members? What kind of Jewish life do they have, if any? Well, actually, of the 84% of the folks who do not pay dues to a Jewish congregation currently, many of them actually participate in Jewish life. And it could be anything from holiday celebrations to education, Jewish education, to attending JCC, synagogue, or Chabad at about 6 and 10. And that was a result from the presentation by Brandeis that sort of stood out for some folks and was perhaps higher than expected. Now, what about how important is being Jewish to folks? And what about the importance of Jewish community? Well, you can see that 8 and 10 here say that it's at least somewhat important to them, that being Jewish is at least somewhat important to them. And over here, that 2/3 say that local Jewish community is important or essential to being Jewish. But there's a big however here. And that means they're feeling disconnected. Many feel disconnected. In fact, 7 out of 10 of those who don't currently pay dues to a congregation feel somewhat or very disconnected to any type of Jewish community. And what are the reasons for that? The top reason is irrelevance, but there are also reasons of a significant portion that say they feel like they don't belong or they're unwelcome. There's also issues around geography and proximity. And others have concerns about not wanting to exclude non-Jewish people or lack of Jewish knowledge. And how about interfaith families? How connected do they feel? Well, over half of households in the greater Denver Jewish area are interfaith couples or families, but only 3 out of 10 feel very comfortable attending Jewish events. 4 out of 10 somewhat comfortable, and 2 out of 10 uncomfortable. Now, we asked some specific questions about obstacles to participating in Jewish life, and then we also asked an open-ended question about, are there other obstacles to participating in Jewish life that you would like to share? So this is results from a qualitative analysis I did on over 600 respondents to that question about other obstacles they wanted to share. And I coded those into various categories. And here you can see the most frequently mentioned are inconvenient location, cost-related issues, not feeling welcome, issues related to interfaith, issues related to not being religious or their partner not being religious, inconvenient times, positions on Israel, feeling like people are cliquey or cliquish, and sometimes they feel it's not for their demographic or particular interest. And then you can see further down some other issues, rabbi issues, synagogue issues, issues related to being LGBTQ. And then here are some more less frequently mentioned obstacles to participating in Jewish life. Everything from not knowing Hebrew or not feeling comfortable enough with it, to not feeling Jewish enough or born or raised Jewish, to being a convert. So I'm going to talk to some specific obstacles we asked about in the survey regarding finances and cost. Before I get into that, I just want to note that I produced profiles based on all of the questions in the survey on economically vulnerable Jewish adults and those over 50. So those are available. Vanessa can put those in the chat to where you can access those. So we asked specifically about if cost has prevented you from going to Israel or sending a child to Israel. And about 1/4 of households said that it had. And you can see for each Jewish engagement group here, the result as well. And then we also asked about sending a child to Jewish summer overnight camp. Did cost prevent you from doing that? And folks with children of the appropriate age, 28% said the cost had prevented them from doing that. And these comments come from the open-ended question about the other obstacles to participating in Jewish life, but they refer to these survey results. So I think they give a good flavor of how people feel and the language they use, and you can get a sense of their emotions. So for instance, camp cost is extremely high, so have not been able to participate until this year and had to have grants to do so. A shame it's so expensive. And this was particularly significant for the communal group. That was statistically significantly higher than some of the other groups. We also asked about financial obstacles to sending a child to Jewish preschool, and 15% of those with kids under the age of 5 said that cost has prevented them from sending a child to Jewish preschool. So there's a perception of that being costly. And similarly with Jewish day school, 15% said that cost prevented them. The cost for Jewish day school education is extremely high. We'll send our kids to a religious school, but it's our largest expense aside from our mortgage. And that is with financial aid from the school. And lastly, with respect to financial obstacles, we asked about cost preventing them from enrolling in Jewish housing. So we asked older adults age 60 plus if cost had prevented them from enrolling in Jewish housing, and 7% said that it had. Now again, the upcoming slides are going to have a lot of comments on them. I'm not going to read through all of them, but you will be able to refer to this later on. And again, I really think that these comments are very rich and can help you understand how people are feeling about these issues. So costs, some people talked about costs in general and feeling that it's expensive to be Jewish and engaged in the community. Growing up in Denver Jewish community, I still feel like money is such an entrance ticket to involvement with very few opportunities to participate in the community without some cost involved. Other cost-related issues included membership at synagogues, and that was perceived as being expensive and cost prohibitive for some, and even for others, not a good return on their investment. So cost of joining a temple, sending my children to religious school is prohibitive. I'd like my children to be bat mitzvah, but it's so expensive, it's not affordable. The synagogue was raising dues, weren't getting anything back from that financial commitment since we didn't have children. Cost of membership and religious education became unsustainable, could not afford several $1,000s a year to maintain synagogue membership, religious school tuition, and Hebrew tutoring. I feel great shame as both a middle-class parent and as a Jewish person that I cannot afford to raise my children Jewish. Another cost obstacle is to attending services, particularly high holiday services, and that can turn people away from services or even from Judaism itself. So the cost is outrageous for what I could afford at the time, walked away from organized Jewish religious services. It's offensive, you require people to pay to participate in high holy day services. But several folks also mentioned how much they appreciate free services, or if a donation is just requested, and mentioned, for instance, at the Denver Botanic Gardens. Programs can also be perceived as too expensive. Activities, events at the Boulder JCC always cost quite a bit from my budget. Another issue around that is childcare. So if they're attending an adult event, they have to pay for a babysitter, or if it's an event that includes kids, the cost for kids might be prohibitive for them. Very few programs are free or affordable on a regular basis. Some events can be expensive, so I don't attend. Other obstacles revolved around not feeling welcome, and there were various reasons people did not feel welcome. It could be because they were a certain demographic, they didn't have children, or they were not married, or they were not native to Colorado, etc. Other folks felt not welcome because they were not Jewish, or quote unquote not Jewish enough, or in an interfaith relationship, or they're a convert. And some others felt unwelcome by the synagogues or the rabbis, and others felt because they didn't have money or aren't donors, and others felt they were not welcome because of their political beliefs. So we'll look at what some folks said about these issues. So you can get a feel for the demographics here. Like I said, not welcoming to older adults. My children are Black and Latino, isolating and not welcoming to people of color. People talked about feeling not welcome because they had children, and people talked about feeling not welcome because they didn't have children. Not warm and inviting, exclusive. And then there were, if you didn't raise your children in Denver, it's hard to break into these groups. There are longstanding pillars of community that act as gatekeepers. Children with special needs, not welcome. Only welcome the wealthy, powerful, beautiful, young. Queer, non-binary, accepting of my full self is difficult to come by. So that gives you a feel for people of different groups not feeling welcome. And then other folks felt not welcome because they weren't Jewish or not Jewish enough. Unaccepting, hard for my non-Jewish husband to feel welcome. It's very sad, frustrating, was not raised Jewish. They question why I'm there. Similarly with convert, community regards me with suspicion. That's made my integration into the community difficult. Interfaith marriage, feel less welcome, maybe judged, questioned or categorized, even critical of our lifestyle. Interfaith families have a difficult time finding programs and opportunities where they aren't made to feel like outsiders, been rebuffed, ignored, welcomed, not welcomed warmly, rejected by rabbis, wasn't considered Jewish enough. My attempts at joining Jewish communities has felt forced and uncomfortable. And just a couple of other reasons why people did not feel welcome, and those are obstacles to participating in Jewish life. I feel unaccepted by some who identify as more conservative religiously, state that they're inclusive, but the people are not welcoming, judgmental, feel like I'm interfering or an outsider. Rabbi never approached us, the community wasn't welcoming, never received a thank you or follow-up, no outreach, never received any communication. Other obstacles revolved around geography and inconvenient location. Now, it's not just about how far it is to a synagogue or an event or the time it takes to get there, but you also have to deal with traffic and the hassle of parking issues and working parents on a Friday trying to get home from work to grab their young kids and head back out in Friday afternoon or evening traffic. Other folks have transportation issues. They don't have a car or they have to take public transportation. And then several others mentioned specific geographies where there are lack of Jewish resources, like the west side of Denver, Aurora, the northwest suburbs between Denver and Boulder. So you can get a feel for some of the comments around inconvenient location. I live on the quote unquote wrong side of town. Very challenging to then commute back with kids for services. No way we can make a family service at 5:30 on a Friday when we both work. Travel 35 miles in Friday afternoon traffic. Traffic and parking issues, hour each way, no synagogue, 20-mile radius, only Jewish family in our neighborhood. And a few more that mention specific areas, Aurora, Northwest Denver, drive 20 miles each way, fighting traffic from the suburbs. Programs are in the east side of Denver or south. It's hard to travel 20 to 30 minutes with a toddler to a Jewish preschool or program. And this distance makes frequent participation difficult. Now, some people felt that their positions on Israel were an obstacle to their participating more in Jewish life. And that ranged from most of them feeling like an Israel right or wrong mentality is promoted at organizations in the Metro Denver area, and they don't want to blindly support Israel. They oppose Israel's current leadership and their policies. And On the flip side, some others felt that some of the Jewish organizations were not pro-Israel enough for them. So with respect to being too pro-Israel, you can see some of the comments here: demand for acceptance of Israeli politics. We don't just support Israel blindly, we feel conflicted, we get berated about not supporting Israel enough. I'm comfortable with the actions Israel geopolitically is an obstacle. Netanyahu, Israel's terrible treatment of Palestinians, Jewish community events are tied up formally and informally with Israel. Israelis' government approach to the Palestinian people in fear of being devalued or attacked by community folks who do not share this perspective. There's no room for debate about Israel. A few more. Israel, right or wrong, people have an outsized influence and are often big donors. We're likely giving up our membership this year. If you don't agree with the policies of Israeli government, you feel alienated. Israel is not my religion. I don't need Israel to identify and practice my Judaism. Jewish life is inextricably and unthinkably combined with pro-Israel stance, and that's an obstacle to my participation. I feel like political arguments and disagreements about Israel are a major barrier, and I feel like I am unwelcome. Now, this is the other side where people feel that organizations are not pro-Israel enough, not enough Israel-focused connection and events. I'd like to attend a non-Orthodox synagogue is very pro-Israel. Very pro-Israel, don't very often agree with our rabbis' political stances. In Boulder, it's hard to be pro-Israel and feel safe sharing your point of view. It's hard to hear rabbis always speaking of everything that Israel does is wrong. Now, this is, Cliquish is an obstacle that came up totally unprompted. We had not asked about anything like that in the survey, but when we asked about other obstacles to participating in Jewish life, some folks, at least enough folks to create a separate category for it, mentioned that people are cliquish, either a temple or community groups. And you can see what they mean by that: not welcoming, act judgmental or cliquish, makes me feel very self-conscious, too cliquey, predicated on social wealth or other related status, not inclusive of new families. You know, if you didn't grow up in Denver or didn't raise your children in here, it's difficult to break into that group. More comments about families were aloof, snobby, Sunday school parents didn't bother to speak to anyone they didn't know. Fitting in is difficult, it makes me less motivated to attend, really unwelcoming to new people. Exclusive and judgmental, it makes me feel really lonely. It's cliquish, I'm not from here, I experienced exclusion, it's not warm and inviting. Now, there were a lot more obstacles, and a few of these we're going to go into in a lot more depth in future workshops. So we will be talking about interfaith related issues, LGBTQ+, Jewish people of color. Those are a few that we'll be talking about in the upcoming diversity, inclusion, and equity workshop in 2 weeks. So I am going to switch gears here and talk about the banner tables that we produced that Vanessa mentioned. As she said, we heard the interests and needs of the organizations, such as the ones you're representing on the call right now, and we wanted to provide additional insights to you based on the study. So we will be providing a deeper understanding with these tables and data, and it will include all survey questions and the results of all survey questions by various subgroups of interest. The presentation by Brandeis was at a very high level and didn't include all of the survey questions. So we want to be sure to get all the data to you so that we can highlight the issues and opportunities facing the community. And most importantly, to make the study's findings more actionable for you and local Jewish organizations. We want you to be able to go into these tables and look up survey results that are of specific interest to you for your strategic planning or sizing or understanding the populations that you serve or would like to serve. Now, there's a lot on this table here, and really move that right now. So I am going to review all of this in depth. Don't be intimidated by it, but it will be really useful to go through this to help you learn how to read the table and interpret the findings. So we'll go through it here. There will be two sets of tables, one for Jewish respondents or adults, and the other table for Jewish set of tables for Jewish households. And Jewish adults here is defined as age 18 plus who consider themselves to be Jewish in any way and have at least one Jewish parent or were raised Jewish or converted to Judaism. So that's just one definition of Jewish. We had to put a stake in the ground to define Jewish in some way for the table. So we can certainly look at the data other ways, but this is a start. So every table will have the text of the survey question. For instance, here, how important is each of the following to what being Jewish means to you? Caring about Israel is a specific one here. And again, every question will have a base or who that question was asked of. And for instance, here it's those who are Jewish or Jewish in another religion or consider themselves Jewish or partially Jewish. And I apologize that I can't, oh, there we go. I can move that down there. Sorry about that. So each table will show the total or all survey respondents and then a subset of respondents. And for instance, here we're looking at by gender, age, marital status, presence of children in the household, age of children, and the type of school that the children go to. So, and then the categories within it, right? The age groups within age. Now, let me show you how to read the table. So here are the responses to the question. And for instance, this 33% here means that 33% of all survey respondents, which represents 23,702 Jewish adults in the Denver metro area. Now that number is very precise, and it's actually overly precise because there is a margin of error or confidence interval around that number. And I will get into that in a little bit after we go through this table to help you interpret the result. But each of these columns the percentages will add to 100%. So then also within each of the subgroups. So the way to interpret this one is 48% of those age 65 plus said that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. Now these letters here, these capital letters, mean that there is a statistically significant difference between this number and the results in columns D and E in this case. So the column labels are up here. It means this 48% is significantly higher than the 23% and 34% of the younger group. And this is with the capital letters, that denotes that it's statistically significant at the 95% level. So there's just a 5% or less chance that this difference in essential between the older group and the two younger groups is due to chance. So that's a high threshold. If you see a lowercase letter, that means that it is a significant difference at the 90% level. So a 10% or less chance that it's just due to chance, that difference is just due to chance. So in this case, 37% of those who do not have children in the household say that caring about Israel is essential to what being Jewish means to them. And that is statistically significantly higher than column J, which is 27% of those who do have children in the household. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how to read this. I also wanted to mention this row here, unweighted base, is actually the number of survey respondents. So the number of people who answered that question. So in this total column, you'll see that 1,240 people answered this question. And I just want to note that while you can use all the percentages in the table, really just focus on the numbers in the Jewish population here in this total column, because that is based on the primary sample. It was designed to be generalized to the population. These subsets of respondents include not just the primary sample, but a supplemental sample so that we could get additional data on these subgroups. We could have bigger numbers. You could see that when you include the supplemental sample, you have 1,343 females, which is higher than the total here. So just a word of caution, these numbers are close, but technically not accurate. So we can certainly get you any numbers that you need. So there will be two banners, sets of banners for the respondents and for households. The first banner, as I showed in this example, shows the results, all the survey questions results by gender, age, marital status, presence of children in the household, age of children, and the school type that the children attend. The second set of banners will include region, Jewish engagement, those 5 Jewish engagement groups, synagogue membership, if they're members or not, that interesting group of folks where someone in the household, at least someone in the household attends a Jewish event, but they're not synagogue members. And then, then if they have donated to a Jewish organization and the amount they've donated to a Jewish organization. And these last two will be dug into a lot more in the next week's presentation on philanthropic trends in the Jewish community. Now, getting back to the survey results, let's see if I can move that back there. I just wanted to give you some rules of thumb on how to interpret the survey results, because there are margins of error around each result, and it varies by sample size and confidence level. So just to help you read this table and interpret the results, for instance, if there was 100 people who responded to the survey question and the result was, say, 50% were female, said they were female, there is a margin of error of plus or minus 8.3 percentage points. So that true result, if we conducted the survey based on the 90% confidence level, if we conducted the survey 100 times, 90 out of 100 times, we would expect a result of 50% plus or minus 8.3, or 41.7 to 58.3. If we go to the 95% confidence level, the margins of error increase a little bit, but of course decrease as the sample size increases. So if you had 500 respondents at the 95% confidence level, if 50% of the people said they were female, for example, and you conducted the survey 100 times, 95 out of 100 times, the result would be 50% plus or minus 4.4, or 45.6 to 54.4. So I know that's a lot of numbers, but I just want to give you a sense of, the numbers in the tables are not written in stone. There are margins of error around those numbers, and this just helps you interpret it. And this is the maximum amount of error at 50%. Obviously, if the result was 2%, it would be lower than 4.4. So just to be conservative. So that concludes what I have to share today. I hope I haven't bored you or put you to sleep, and hopefully you learned some insights about Jewish engagement and learned how to read these tables that can be accessed. I'm sure Vanessa will put where they can be accessed in the chat. And thank you for your attention, and please feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa now for some more thoughts and to lead the Q&A and to plug some upcoming data workshops. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fran. Thanks, everyone. And so Fran just posted some upcoming dates, but before that, we have about 15 minutes left in our time together. So I would welcome you to drop your questions into the Q&A, and I will start with a couple that folks have asked throughout the presentation. And I want to start with this one because I really love it. I think a lot of what Fran has presented has been some of the challenges that were unearthed by the study. And I want to just take this opportunity to remind you all that these are not judgments, these are not recommendations from Rose Community Foundation, from the co-funders, or from Fran. These are data points that we can use to understand how to better or differently serve our community and to know our audiences. So there was a question about sort of the bright spots of the study and of the data. And while community studies are not necessarily designed to unearth those bright spots, what I would say some of the takeaways for me in this study, and then I'll ask Fran, are around the demographics of who's here. We have 134,000 folks living in Jewish households, which presents enormous opportunity. We have a multi-ethnic, multi-faith, multi-racial Jewish community living here. And while the data about synagogues, the affiliation rates are lower than they are in some other Western communities, we still see that folks are utilizing synagogues. 60% of adults in this community attend synagogue every year, attend events, services, and high holidays, whether or not they're members there. So I'd see all of that are some of the bright spots that I've seen throughout this study, but I want to give Fran an opportunity to answer this question because she has been in this data for a year now, maybe a little longer, and knows it in and out. So Fran, do you have any bright spots that you would elevate from this study?
Well, I just see so many areas of opportunities and potential. But as a researcher, I am not going to go into that. For me, this is just a gold mine of data. I think we can look at this so many different ways. We can tailor it to your organization's needs. So I think it's, one person could see a result, the glass is half full, another person sees it as half empty. So it depends on how you look at it and what perspective you're coming from. But again, there's so much potential to help organizations with this data in terms of, market sizing or population sizing, and how to better address the needs of the community.
Thanks, Fran. Another question was, someone said, I think the statement about not being relevant is really compelling. What are some examples, and is that coming more from the qualitative data? So can you talk about the relevance factor and what we might be able to understand using the new banner tables about the attitudes and the behaviors of folks that did say they're not engaging because it's not relevant to where they are in their life right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, the not relevant comes from a specific question in the survey and that was asked directly. That was a response that people could give, that it was not relevant. All the qualitative comments flesh that out, and you can see many reasons why people find it not relevant. It's not, it's geared towards families and I don't have children, or vice versa. The topics are not of interest. I mean, there's just a real many numerous reasons why it would not be relevant, and you can see those in the comments, and we can dig a lot deeper into those. But I think I gave you some of a flavor of what those are in the presentation today.
Thanks, Fran. Someone else asked if we can compare the findings in the Denver metro area to those from other cities. And so I will answer that real quick, and then I will let you add anything on based on what we know from the original body of work by Brandeis. These questions in the Denver metro area study were originally not the Brandeis questions. And so when Brandeis took over the study in 2019, they did their best to align them with their standard questions so that they could be compared. So some questions and some data, such as the types of Jewish people, communal, holiday, immersed, those you can go to the Brandeis website and look at their other studies. I think Cincinnati has recently finished a study, Atlanta has recently finished a study, and you can look there to make some comparisons, but it's not going to be apples to apples on every question. Fran, do you want to add anything? Did I get that right?
You did, yeah, absolutely right. Some questions are directly comparable and others aren't. Others are close, and Brandeis has done this in many other communities. So And there are lots of other studies, the Pew research study, we use some of the questions from that. So some things are directly comparable, and there are some interesting comparisons. Like, for instance, you said there's more households that are not affiliated here than in other parts of the country.
Thank you. Another question is around the data that you mentioned for economically vulnerable households, which I'll just put a plug in. We'll post that data today on the same places we have put all of the other new banner tables. So that will be accessible there. But the question is that cost seems like it's a frequently cited barrier. What can this tell us about the economics of this community?
Yes, it was frequently cited, well, in part because we did specifically ask questions about costs, but then it also came up unprompted in the qualitative comments. And you could see that there are many different aspects of costs, whether it was just overall or about, preschool or day school or camps or whatever. Again, we can look at the data in different ways. We could look at the responses of those who have lower income and see how much a cost is a barrier for them. So, or different groups. So there's a lot of different ways that we can dig further into this and to better understand that. But a good start is looking at the economically vulnerable Jewish adults and seniors.
Great, thank you. We have another question about location. Because location seems to have also been a frequently cited barrier, how can I learn more about people who are not in the Denver metro area?
Well, not in the Denver metro area.
Folks, I think, Fran, I think they mean folks that are not sort of in
Denver.
the Denver proper area, since we know that there's a lot of folks that are living outside of Denver in places like, Longmont, Lafayette,
Right.
Lyons, Westminster, where there's not a ton of organized Jewish life. So where can folks go to find out about the communities that are living there?
Well, I would start with the banner tables that show all of the survey question results by region. And you saw the regions. So we have not just Denver, but we have Aurora and Boulder, the north and west, and et cetera, and the north and east. So I would look to those, and there are significant differences by region on many of the questions. And obviously some places have more Jewish resources than others, and that's evident in the data.
Great, thank you. I think we'll hold any other questions, but we've recorded stuff in the chat and we'll make note of these. And what I'd say is that Fran began to talk a little bit about interfaith families. There's a lot more data around diversity, equity, and inclusion in this community. And because there was so much data to get through around engagement and disengagement, we wanted to pull that out separately. So we have 2 upcoming sessions, January 14th, 9 a.m. We're going to talk about the Jewish philanthropic trends. As you all may remember from the original Brandeis report, there was a lot about sort of what they called charity within and outside of the Jewish community. So we're going to dive into some of that data in hopes that we can unearth some new information that may help your organizations as you think about how to activate and compel philanthropic investment in your organizations. And then January 21st, we'll be talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. We'll dive into some of the pieces around our multi-faith, multi-ethnic Jewish community and where folks are feeling connected and the attitudes and behaviors. So with that, I want to again thank Fran Simon. I want to thank the J. and Rose Phillips Family Foundation of Colorado and the Sturm Family Foundation and our partners at Brandeis, who spent a great deal of time with this research back in 2018 and 19. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you.